So Kat is a creative director working in the fashion and the fashion adjacent industries. I realize that I'm kind of increasingly using that like fashion adjacent term as this kind of, I don't know, it's quite a funny. So she is a founder and editor-in-chief of Paradigm Trilogy, a digital first fashion cultural production, which was launched in 2021, I think. It was 2021, right?
Yeah.
So issue 1 was set in New York with the title Avant-Garde and Kitsch. And the second issue was published earlier this year, set in Berlin with the title Man versus Machine. And there's a series of kind of questions that it explores. Firstly being, how can a constructive critique of the current state of cultural production take shape? And the introductory article, which was written by Kat, asked the question, how will technology influence the future of creativity? So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Kat. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the intro and thank you for having me. I was very excited because I feel like I'm in such an echo chamber and one rarely gets the chance to speak to, younger audience that are gonna be part of the industry in some form. So I've prepared a small presentation before we start our conversation, just to give you a bit of background on who I am and what Paradigm Trilogy is. So I'm going to share my screen. So as I said, thank you for having me. It's Thursday, February 23rd, 2023, and it's time to shift the paradigm. And what I mean by that is that I feel like the reason why I started this publication is to introduce more kind of thinking that evokes change and really questioning everyday conventions of our industry, of our work. So for me, every day it's time to shift the paradigm and not just follow a protocol that has been put in place because it's in charge or powerful. So I'll start off by talking about who I am, then about what Paradigm Trilogy is, and then we can figure out together what I'm doing here, talking to you guys. So I am a creative director, and I know that is a very charged term. The general definition, as you might as well know, is a creative director is a person who makes high-level creative decisions, and with those decisions oversees the creation of creative assets such as advertisements, products, events, or logos. My personal definition of that is I see myself as a bridge between creatives and artists and the business people. So I speak both languages. And important to know, which even some people in the industry far along still don't understand the difference. You would be surprised how many times I have to fight to be called a creative director instead of an art director. An art director is purely focused on the visuals, the visual experience. Oh, Jack's joining. Sorry. An art director is purely focused on the visual side, focusing on layouts, logos, image placement, whereas a creative director is far more strategic and, more 360 in their approach. And what's really important to say as well is, of course, an art director is paid far less than a creative director. So at the end of the day, you might as well want to be a creative director. This was a graph that I did for Paradigm 1, which didn't make it into the issue, because I kind of wanted to address this, what's happening around the term creative director. It's being thrown around a lot. It's become like an Instagram caption for almost anyone. And as you can see here, I put Jesus and Karl Lagerfeld, and there's Olivier Zahm, Kanye West. There's like designers, celebrities, everyone can actually be a creative director. And what it boils down to is that for me, the way I see myself is that I'm just a channel that's tapping into what's out there in culture. And anyone that does that and can translate it into an actual advertisement for me as a creative director. This is also a meme I did, which didn't make it into the issue. What brands are sort of thinking they're getting when they hire a creative director, there's always a lot of pressure on that role. They expect you to be an art director, researcher, strategist, and they expect to see direct impact on the brand from like even one project that you're doing. So it's a high pressure role with a lot of expectations just because it's so little defined and definable, which is also the beauty of it. And I see sort of two types of creative directors. Neither one is, you know, more important or better than the other, but I was always thinking, you know, oh, there's these people that are dressed super cool and they have such a vibe, and I'm so not that. Turns out there's just these type of creative directors that, like, you know, have the best playlist, that send brands like a mood board of fresh visuals. And that's for me like the vibes creative directors. And then there's obviously like the more strategic creative directors that are CCO territory and more, you know, strategy based and sort of like normcore. And I guess we all know which category I'm falling in. So I just wanted to go into that pretty quickly because I feel like it's a question, you know, if some of you would want to become a creative director, that I'm being asked a lot. What does it take to be a creative director? I did not come up with that list entirely on my own. It was sort of, it's kind of, you know, some of the things have been said to me along the way. I remember when I was working at a creative agency and I started, and the CEO of that company, he told me, you know, you really suck at typography and you suck at Photoshop, but you have a strong opinion and you know a lot of people and you have good taste. So here's my list of what I think you need to bring in order to be a creative director. Is a strong opinion, then a leadership personality. It's incredibly important that you can represent authority to a wide range of people coming from different backgrounds, and you can establish authority pretty quickly on a set, within a boardroom. So it is helpful to be sort of a type A personality. Then in that vein, strong communicational skills, because any project falls and succeeds with good communication and everyone being sort of on the same page. That's, I think, 90% of the job. Making sure that everyone thinks of the same thing when you're saying model on the beach. And then I didn't want to write taste because I feel like we're, you know, less defined by taste, but it's about a sense for the taste of the time. It's understanding, you know, what contemporary is like. And then for me, unfortunately, a biggie is network. I wouldn't be where I am today, and I will get into how I got here, if I hadn't had the connections I had and the personal relationships I have, because fashion is such a personal industry. It's really about, do people want to hang out with you or not at the end of the day? Okay, so that's all about me. And then in 2020, I started sort of feeling a bit upset at the media landscape in fashion. I felt like there was this like blank space within the industry. It almost came from, I used to have a lot of phone calls, you know, with Ferdinando, or be it, you know, cultural writers, and we were talking about things, all things fashion. And these conversations I felt needed to be publicized, and they were not, you know, you couldn't see them in System magazine, you couldn't see them in O32C, although they were heading into that direction. So I was just like, there's no publication that's talking about the process, the creative process for the industry. So an industry inside publication for other creatives. And so that was one reason why I started thinking of doing a publication. And then the other reason was that I was sort of upset with some of the behaviors I saw within, you know, my peers, or the way they approached work, which seemed sort of free from moral or like understanding of self and their role in culture. And so I just wanted to explore that. So what is Paradigm Trilogy? Vogue called it the coolest new fashion magazine. And then the New York Times said, don't call it a magazine. So I really like that because for me, it doesn't matter if it's a magazine or not. It really doesn't, because it is an industry critique. The form is just a vehicle. And it's an industry critique in the shape of an open source mobile first trilogy publication. That said, I feel like the closest we got to like a digital fashion publication was like Bottega's digital magazine that they had. And it was sort of like a PDF flip through thing. And I was just like, God, like our industry, we really are not tapping into the technology that is out there. And I wanted to design a magazine thinking from our experience on the iPhone, because we live in our phones. So I wanted it to feel like mobile native, like as if it had been designed on the iPhone. And that is not groundbreaking in other segments, but in fashion it was. So mobile first was an approach. And then open source in this case really just means I didn't monetize it. I didn't want to monetize it because I wanted to say everything I wanted to say. And I knew the moment I would start bringing in advertisers, I couldn't. So the beauty of Paradigm Trilogy is that these heavy analyses are hidden among beautiful pictures. And here's like the third element. I used fashion as a vehicle to smooth over pretty radical thoughts and make them bite-sized and make the audience that I wanted to capture open to them. So, you know, you have like a quote by Stalin standing next to like Sasha Pivovarova in like a, you know, knight's armor editorial. Okay, so this is the overview of the 3 issues. In 2021, I started with Avant-Garde and Kitsch. 2024, I published Man versus Machine just in January, this January. And the third part is going to be Recognition versus Expression, and that's all going to be set in Paris. The trilogy for me was important because also I feel like a problem of a lot of publications is the infinity that they explore, where, you know, at some point I feel like people they know they have to do another issue and they have nothing to say, so they just like try and find whatever. I wanted to be very purposeful. And I knew that after the third one, I would not have anything more to say, most probably. So Avant-Garde and Kitsch was pretty much about the past. I'll get into the issues a little bit more in depth in a second. So why did I do Paradigm Trilogy? I just expressed that I wanted to use the technology that was out there. I wanted to define market capitalism by basically having, by not monetizing it, by doing something that had that didn't make sense as a business. I think that's a really important part of it. And I wanted to deliver important information to my peers in a really bite-sized way. So catching a short attention span, because also I feel like that's a lot of the issue with cultural writing, is that you have to read through someone's prose and, you know, yeah, personal exploration. And I wanted to cut, you know, sort of myself out of it. So this was Avant-Garde and Kitsch, which was mostly about the past. And when I say about the past, I wanted to capture how we got here, which is how we got from art and artifice merging into one, which is like art becoming commercialized, which is our current mode of operations. And that's why New York felt really accurate with like, you know, the New York of Warhol and technological reproduction in his art, and how sort of stardom had changed the landscape. And this is one of the graphs from that issue. Our idea of cultural production is merely 200 years old. We're at the cusp of change. So by looking at these like bigger arcs, I just want to show that, you know, how we work is not set in stone. It's been a fairly new development. So we can always rethink what we're doing. You can always question the status quo. And I'll just get into that pretty quickly. So the old system of art in the Middle Ages, art was craft, there was patronage, commissions of artworks, there were collaborations called guilds. There were a lot of inventions, and borrowing the work of others was okay. Then the modern system of art, there's sort of like a contradiction or like a fight between fine art versus craft. They don't want to be, you know, seen as similar. There's market and commodification, which seemingly gave the artist freedom because he was free to sell whatever to the market. But I think that's just that's not quite accurate. And there's individuals that are seen as geniuses, and there's copyright and trademark. So now we're like thinking of ideas as like we have ownership over ideas all of a sudden. And for me, in the new creative paradigm, which we have seen partially in Web 3.0, partially also fail, art can be everything. We don't need to define it. There's decentralized patronage. What I mean by that is communities are funding your work. There's communities again, there's hubs. So it's not about the individual genius anymore. And there's collective consciousness and an open source approach. So again, ideas are not necessarily proprietary, they belong to the community. So that's kind of like, that would be lovely to end up at, you know, like that's where we want to go. And then, you know, I'm almost done here. This is the opener of Avant-Garde and Kitsch. This was a text message from Joseph Stalin. I added, you know, thoughts on TikTok. It's from the Dialectical and Historical Materialism in 1938, in which he basically predicted that our attention span is gonna shorten dramatically. And just to give you a feeling, you know, there's always this like political angle that reaches beyond fashion. Yeah, and so the centerpiece of the first issue was the new creative paradigm. Facing the last stages of late capitalism, we predict the dawn of a new way of working for the creative class. And some of the, you know, I had theories in there. I predicted the death of the collaboration. You know, that's part of the new way of working, which is creators are becoming brands and they are their own platform. So how much, you know, does it actually benefit a brand anymore to collaborate with a creator? Because I feel like mostly the creators benefit from any collaboration today. And this was also, I had these like little drawings made by the artist Kyle Keyes. Am I contributing or am I masturbating? This was one of the main questions that I ask myself all of the time when I work on projects, which is like, am I doing this to look cool or like to show signal to my peers? Or am I doing this, does this actually bring something to the table? We had a reference dump where we asked leading creatives to share their references, again, in this effort of, you know, sharing intelligence, sharing resources. And then we had a love letter, which was a spotlight on New York creatives and their friendship between each other. And how, you know, that led to powerful creative projects. Okay, then we had an editorial, which was about avant-garde, and in juxtaposed by an editorial that represented Kitsch, which was an American catalog. And I thought it was really funny to have Isa Lish model it. She is a Mexican Japanese model and be sort of like the American poster girl. And these are all juxtaposed with like quotes from, you know, Werner Herzog and other like heavyweights. Okay, so now here we are, which is way more relevant to our conversation today, issue 2, where I looked towards the future, man versus machine. It felt really right to do this in Berlin, or, do it from a Berlin-centric view, because I think Berlin represents is it like a projection almost of our idea of utopia. A lot of utopias play out there. There's like a romanticized idea of what Berlin, the potential of Berlin. And I think a lot of artists that are there are focused on the digital sphere and exploring possible futures. There's a sort of freedom to do that I don't feel in New York, where the machine's really working and you rarely look outside of it. So issue 2, man versus machine, came to my mind because of, the emergence of like DALL-E. Actually, it was not DALL-E Mini. It was when OpenAI, I had looked into OpenAI, and DALL-E Mini came through when we were almost half done with the issue. But I could see the AI revolution, quote unquote, sort of picking up in the mainstream. And I remember, let me jump to this quickly. I remember working on a campaign and sort of saying, I feel like a factory worker. I don't know if almost anyone could do what I'm doing, because it's so predictable. And I really believe that the way we're creating content currently, like apart from some outliers and some very privileged people, can be replaced by a machine and can be, done by an algorithm, because we're just basically creating predictable data at this point. So the cover, and I'm just gonna show you, although I don't see anyone. Every issue, I should have said, has an analog component. So for the first issue, we had matches, which was very lowbrow and felt right for the topic of avant-garde and kitsch. And there's a QR code, and that lets you access the issue. For issue 2, we took a mold of Paloma Alcesar's face. Was the idea of, capturing the face of the future. And the artist Hamzat Rahim created a mini sculpture of her face. He always takes off people's noses. It's sort of his trademark. And there's an NFC chip in there. So if you hold over your phone, I'm sure you will not see this probably on the camera. If you hold over your phone, it opens the website on your phone. So it gives access to the issue. And this is the big Paloma sculpture that we took in this picture here. So this is the shoot that came with it. I just wanted to document the process behind the sculpture. Another part of the issue was something I worked on with Jack Ritger, who I believe is on this call, whose name I've seen. He's an incredible artist, writer, researcher, and was an important part of this issue, because a lot of the topics were far less, my territory. He sort of brought a lot of the intelligence. So we were like, the future is sort of not something positive anymore in the zeitgeist. I feel like people are not thinking about the future and having a positive feeling. We wanted to think about what possible outcomes from where we are can happen. And we wanted to put it in sort of like a BuzzFeedy test to take on your own. And I highly encourage you guys to take it, because it's quite fun and pretty accurate. So, we ask you, which Disney princess are you? And a few more questions, and then you get your answer. And for example, me, I'm like a neo-Gnostic AI oracle, but you'll have to get into that yourself. Then on that note of like looking at the future, we wrote about job descriptions of the future with the writer Reggie James, who's mostly writing on tech, also has a startup called Eternal, and kind of thinking about, what jobs will pop up in the sphere of like AI. Like for example, here's an AI wrangling engineer that makes sure that the AI is not too sentient, but also not too machine-like. So just trying to get a grasp on like what new jobs could there be before we enter post-work. Yeah, and then the centerpiece of this issue is man versus machine. How will technology influence the future of creativity? And this is maybe something that we can then also look back at when we have our conversation. And when I started thinking about it, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that this is an old conversation, that man versus machine. You can even think back into, you know, what did the wheel mean to the man? It's not something, we like to think about it as a new conversation. And I identified or put my theory sort of in 3 buckets, which was like theories that related to fearing the machine, fighting it, and then having faith that, you know, the right outcome will present itself. So I looked at it really from the place of like survival, or like death or survival. Which I think the public discourse is looking at it as well. And it's quite dramatic, to be honest. So the first theory is algorithm creativity, and I'm showing you this because I think it wraps up a lot of the other theories. Can creativity be automated? Will the next season of The White Lotus be better left to the hands of an AI spinning season 3 off of 1 and 2? Siri, who's the young version of Jennifer Coolidge? Pre-DALL-E Mini, you might have thought less about it, but below the surface, you know you're nothing but a factory content worker in the Instagram likes hamster wheel and its insatiable appetite for more. Quality got replaced by visibility, and visibility is in the hands of the algorithm. #shadowbanned. Cultural production turned content creation in capitalist society can be fully automated, doesn't need the human spirit. It's a matter of staying informed by scrolling down the feed. So what on earth makes you think AI will only touch physical jobs? I was also thinking lately that graphic designers are looking at a pretty like bad fate, like fate. I think they're going to be the first ones after Fiverr to, you know, maybe lose their jobs to AI. So, and then, you know, on that note, I was trying to, on the right here, write a formula of how a campaign could be fed into a machine, sort of brand DNA plus current fairs, plus photographer, light and subject, plus social media data analytics. And just to humanize that for a moment, I think if you ask any creative director who should do the next product campaign, there will be such a consensus on the photographer's side that, you know, it's very predictable. The user mindset is another theory, which was basically about us living in a system and not questioning it, which has been, you know, the terror of software or like of convenience that the iPhone introduced, and you not understanding how, or us not understanding how a machine actually operates, so we can't question it. Corporate culture, which is, I think, where culture is at right now, where corporation and finance are actually creating culture because fashion turned an industry. But it's become awfully clear, you know, with the rise of crypto, which has been so culturally driven. So I'm suggesting in this article, for example, a Balenciaga-Blackstone collaboration, which I think would be very honest. And then also talking about the general state of culture in which we sort of want people to be geniuses, and we want certain underlying currents and dark sides of our soul to be made visible in fashion and in culture and in entertainment, but not too much of it. So I'm speaking about monetizable pathology, which is like your mental illness is like something you can sell to, you know, the audience, to the consumer, but like, please don't go too far. And that's something that I think about a lot, how we as a culture are perpetuating these like geniuses that we then, you know, dismantle and take apart. And interesting was Vogue wrote this article the day I wrote this, the defining cultural trope of 2022, cannibalism. So yeah, even in the most commercial outlets, we're seeing this sort of dark, twisted fantasy. And then Call of Data, which is basically, I believe that Adam Curtis's "Your Real Job is to Shop" got replaced by "Your Real Job is to Create Data," which is me on Instagram looking through things and posting is money in the pocket of other people. And that's actually what I'm here to do. Another theory was digital amnesia, which is questioning sort of, in this video, unfortunately I didn't drop it in. We asked OpenAI about their thoughts on the racial exploitation of Virgil Abloh's ready-to-wear line, and it was right after his death. And the algorithm had been programmed before his death, so it didn't know about the death. So in this theory, I'm basically exploring sort of almost like the end of history, how memory is kind of, or forgetting can be a positive thing and then a human thing that we maybe should be tapping into more. Lo-fi sci-fi also relates to the algorithm conversation or technology conversation, in which I'm basically saying that by preferring a specific aesthetic, you can prefer, like an aesthetic is always connected to a system or a thought. And by coming to prefer an aesthetic that is not in line with, you know, high tech and technological progress, you can possibly change the system or the outcome or the next iteration of it. So, you know, we're all shit posting now, like low res images. So what does that mean? Yeah, and on that note, I just republished Tito Stiles in Defense of the Poor Image, which she already predicted that and talked about it way earlier, and kind of blurred out these current campaigns. Yeah, some of that was also a big part of the issue was, you know, how old is this conversation? And bringing it back to nature, and that technology is always just a reflection of what we see in the real world. For me, the stone is a good example, which represents intelligence, or you could also say memory. And then here's a hard drive, which does the same thing. Or, you know, you have a mother, and in sci-fi movies, the motherboard is the computer. So here's an example of an editorial we created, where we wanted to give all the power to AI. We collaborated with the artist Loretta Fahrenholz and Jack, who operated the machine by feeding it Schiaparelli archive images and creating these like dreamlike creations. Just some images. So we really wanted to explore how much can we hand off authority to the machine and let it just develop a concept on its own. And then juxtaposed to that, I wanted to do an editorial about men, shot by the artist Tobias Spichtig in Berlin. And I wanted to place all sort of the digital Web 3.0 artists in nature out of their context. So here you have Annalisa Teachworth, Billy Rennekamp, who's like in crypto now, Simon Denny, I'm sure is familiar to you guys, and Carla Henkel, Carl Holmquist, and then the guys from New Models. And then in the last editorial, we explored sort of what is the merging of man and machine, which is when tech is luxury, gadgets are the new it bags, and Ali is wearing the future, which is now. So I wanted to do an editorial without fashion, and just technology. So here you see like the Tesla Cyber Whistle. She's holding a Nintendo Switch in the other picture, the STEM player, which I don't know if I'm still allowed to show. And I'm this lady in the Tesla suit, the Tesla bot that is still unreleased. Okay. So what am I doing here? Well, you tell me. I'm here to have a conversation with you guys, and I hope I didn't awfully bore you. And maybe my first question is to Daniel, because I saw your post this morning about the Burberry show, and I really wonder what you actually think about Daniel Lee's Burberry show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. That was like super. I mean, genuinely, like, really fascinating. And so I have so many like questions and notes being taken. But yeah, in response to your immediate question, I thought the collection was, I mean, to be honest, I didn't like study it in great detail, but it just to me just seemed really dull. And just the sort of commentary around it, just I was like, I found it really, yeah, like really uninspiring. But that's also like my general kind of view towards Burberry anyway, like, as you know, and they're kind of the recent shift from sort of sans serif to serif, and or I mean, I just think it's so, there's something incredibly dull about that, the way that it's I think the way that it presents itself is just incredibly dull, and that kind of like emphasis on Britishness as a thing. I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I find it very yeah, very uninspiring. And I don't even, I mean, maybe it does work from a commercial context. I have no knowledge or particular interest really as such, but in that, yeah.
It makes me think, I think of Burberry as a functional brand, which is like, actually it's coming from like one product. It's like almost like Barbour. And I really respect a brand like Barbour that was not too lured into fashion, except for like a few collaborations with Alexa Chung, but they kept their identity around like functional fashion. And Burberry sort of, you know, stretched that. And that's what I think you call boring, because actually there's not much to it. Besides that functional core of like this one trench coat that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's just been stretched out of proportion.
Yeah. And I think also it's like, you know, I remember a few years ago when it was kind of, I think they brought in someone from Apple, and the way that they kind of were, at least internally, like structuring themselves was almost like they were wanting to operate as if they were like a tech giant, you know, like they wanted to operate as if they were like Apple or something. And it just, I don't know, it just feels, actually as a brand, for me, it just feels very almost like out of touch. And sort of not, I mean, I think we were just talking about, like, I think it was about their logo and about this kind of like fascination with their fascination with their logo. And we were both saying like, it just seems a very dated view of even like what the function of a logo is now. Where, you know, we were given examples of, say, like with Martin Rose, but also I guess like with Balenciaga, where there's a kind of like openness with like messing around with with the title of the brand title, and the logo having this affordances to do that. And it just seems like that kind of yeah, like preciousness on, and the kind of big statements about going from sans serif to serif or whatever, as an example, just feels very sort of like, I mean, I don't know, maybe people do care, but I was like, I really don't care. Like, I'm really not that.
Like a newspaper tossing around on the ground.
Yeah. And then in a few years' time, it'll go back to sans serif, and it's like, oh, okay. And you know, it's, I don't mean,
like, yeah, gravity has shifted. No, yeah, but the funny thing is, it's going to be really successful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For me, yeah. I mean, I say, yeah. I mean, I guess I say all of this without
That's
any.
Really what I want to, yeah.
Yeah.
In all the critique.
Yeah, for sure. Really yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's still, I mean, yeah, I mean, especially the collection is just, or the kind of commentary about it, I just feel like the sort of, yeah, the reference to kind of Britishness and all that, again, I find that very, yeah, there's something very kind of like seemingly, well, maybe like, well, from a business perspective, maybe smart, but it just feels kind of a bit lazy. creatively feels very kind of lazy, I think. But you know, that's yeah. I don't have any investment in them in any way, so I, you know, like that's both, I guess, yeah, good and bad from that perspective. I mean, like maybe we can ask what do everyone else does anyone else have a kind of an opinion on?
Yeah, please. I actually want to hear from you guys. That's what I was here for. So.
Yeah, so also, okay, if you can turn your cameras on, that would be better. Otherwise, it's just our lonely faces in the corner. Hey, that was like a nice transition from black to kind of the light, sort of like yeah, it was nice.
Thank you. I learned recently. Hi, I'm Lisa. Thank you for your talk. And thank you for the Paradigm. I read it today, paged all of it. I was
wow.
Well, it was not that hard. But I was wondering with the not wondering actually with the Burberry, and as well I turned my camera on, so I might as well say something. I've learned not so long ago, because I guess I was too young to remember it, but that Louis Vuitton brand started the line of clothes with Marc Jacobs actually to serve as a backdrop for the bags, and they didn't spread out the bags into like a crazy brand because bags still are different category of goods. They just created an addition to like sell them better. And it's funny how with a coat you cannot really do the same, because then if you spread out the coat you create actually more clothes. So it's not like they started making that one bag or like that one pair of boots or that one glove or whatever. So it's funny how it didn't work. And I also think it's like a brand for those people who want to wear Laura Piana, but they cannot afford it, but they want to look like that. So it's also a weird like simulacra of a thing in the end.
Yeah, that makes so much sense what you just said. They didn't have like a hero product accessory that would save them. And but I think on that note, you know, Moncler did it really well. They have also, they basically also have just a jacket, but they added the layer of excitement through collaboration and these crazy jackets that are coming out of Genius. But at the end of the day, the thing they're selling the most is still the black puffer jacket.
Probably same with the trench. I guess it's also the same, but like, yeah. Imagine how many trenches they could accumulate if they would collaborate with all other people who are trying to create their perfect trench. Also, as Alexa Chung, for example, and her now defunct brand, trying to mimic it, and then actually it could have been different.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think they're like stuck between a rock and a hard place, because of course, you know, trench is not that functional of an object. And I just think they've scaled far too much. So they have to support that scale and their shareholders. So they have to come up with more products and make far less sense. So, But I agree with you.
I think that your reference to Moncler is really interesting, because I guess like there is something, like even if their base or core product is, you know, like not necessarily super interesting, but I guess it's functional, all those things, whatever. But there is something exciting about the brand itself, and sort of like I get a sense that they're sort of interested in doing certain things where my view of, or my perception of Burberry is just not that. So, but again, that's I don't. Does anyone go on?
I'm afraid of Zoom group calls, because I think there are so many people who want to talk, and then I'm like, oh, and then the like window becomes green, and you're like all of a sudden big, like horrifying. But yeah, I had a question actually. If maybe we can go back a little bit to the Paradigm, and maybe I'm just scrolling through it, and then there is this also part about post-core. And I also listened to you talk with new models about the paradigm, and there you vocalized your dislike for coring everything, and yeah, how you call it, name there is this word for like name, not name dropping, but basically trend name dropping, and that maybe Burberry is a post-core thingy where it accumulates too many contents for itself, and I don't know, some sort of simulacra as well, so we can tie it back a little bit to where we started.
Yeah. That's an interesting comparison, or like, and like, you know, contextualization with the Burberry thing. I would actually say that's funny because I think brand-wise, we went from a place of like where a monolithic brand, the more you were like sort of set in stone and had your idea and your product in place and weren't wagering, you were winning. But that is not quite true anymore. If we look at companies that are really successful today, we still have those, which is Apple, you know, right up there, really defined. But then there are brands that are that have no core anymore. And I think a lot about, in that sense, about Dior. It has moved so far away from its heritage. You don't really even have a sense of the founding story anymore. And that gives it the potential to be almost this chameleon-like brand that can be anything. And so their non-coreness is a positive thing for them. Whereas, you know, you just said with Burberry trying to accumulate too many things, that's a downfall. It's funny because I was working on Adidas, their strategy for All Stars, which is, you know, the Stan Smiths, like their core selling sneakers. And my experience was that this company is completely disorganized and fractured, and there's so many departments, it's just far too big to control. And it was one of the most successful years for Adidas last year. And I feel like the lack of strategy, that like the diversion is almost the most contemporary thing. So I'm seeing sort of like a moving away from like, but to answer, I don't know if it even was a question, just to speak very quickly on post-core. For me, it has two elements. One being a linguistic element, and then one being sort of like an identity element. Post-core in an linguistic context is me having gotten upset at, you know, coining terms, because I feel like the moment you define something, you almost kill it. We can see that in, you know, Web 3.0 or crypto announced themselves as a revolution, and where are we now? It's almost like we're trying to process things or define things whilst they're happening, taking away the potential avenues they could take that defy our definition. So I'm a bit annoyed at, sort of like bored by cultural writing, making assumptions that then, you know, lead to no outcome. So I'm pledging for less defined definitions. And then the other element of that is that post-core for me is a way of how we gather identity today. It's just a term I'm using, which is, I make the example of Dasha Nekrasova, who like, let's think about our identity as sort of like, you know, an assemblage of memes, which is like an assemblage of modes. So I'm like not anymore a creative director and I walk around in a turtleneck. I'm like creative director, but I can look like a slut in a bra, and like I can be Christian, but I also go to a strip club, like trying to be as many contradictions as possible while not associating yourself with any of them really. And that's for me just another form of the same old story, which is system affirming by putting on like a fake contrarian hat, which still uses like tropes of the system. But I don't even know if that was your question, so I'll stop here.
Well, I successfully steered you way into another broader topic.
I guess there was one thing I was just struck me, and I guess like this could be something also to potentially like pivot towards also like talking about AI was I guess there was two things about I guess when you were talking about Dior and that sort of almost like ability to be able to kind of operate in these different ways and sort of not having this kind of core element to it. There was one thing was, I think when we were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago where I think you, Kat, you mentioned like fashion being this kind of like almost like a hyper node in a network at the moment, where it's able to sort of where all these other forces can sort of like pass through it or intersect with it. And then so I was thinking about that, but then I was also thinking last week we had a summit where Kenrick McDowell was bringing up this notion of multidimensionality with as a way of understanding how AI models work, and as a kind of like an extension of the network. And this notion of multidimensionality would sort of, in my head, it's kind of like seems to connect to this like post-core thing where like a thing can be multiple things at the same time through different perspectives or different forms of connections. So I was just like wondering in a way like that sort of sense of multidimensionality, both in relation to this kind of post-core aspect, but also how AI systems models actually sort of like function, is there may be something kind of significant in that, you know, if we are in this kind of like post-core period, or but yeah, but it was not really a question, but I guess like maybe the question would be something to do with like fashion and that sort of hyper nodal aspect of it, and sort of like where do you first of all, like do you see that as being a recent thing, and then like thinking about kind of AI, like how do you think that's going to sort of like play out?
It's funny that because like Dan Thorley from A Magazine, we just had him on a video for an interview, and he said something so simple. I was like, wow, simple answers still exist. He was asked about, you know, what's the state of fashion? And he was like, everything goes. Like everyone can do everything anytime. And I think so, to your question, I think it is not a recent development. It gradually happened with one of the elements that we were able to see is the splintering off from the fashion calendar, people doing shows whenever they want. So people changing up, you know, the schedule to to match their own thing. So while Rodarte was showing in New York, there was a Celine show in Paris. That's sort of one indicator. And then the other indicator is that I feel like, you know, these sections in Vogue, I mean, who cares about Vogue, but like these sections in Vogue of like trends feel far less guided by like collections that don't feel like, you know, there's one message from a season. It's more like trends are related to like celebrities wearing a certain thing. So I think that designers are less, it's really about like tapping into your own thing, less about like the mob and presenting sort of like a unified message. So that also feels like a little post-core. And to your point, like I think for me, post-core there's a positive element to it, which is I think if we are looking to become, you know, non-binary and fluid and all of these things, we're like one step closer, which is, you know, contradictions can exist together in ourselves all the time. And then the question about AI, I don't really know how to answer that. Could you maybe speak a little bit more about what you meant with how that manifests itself in AI or in the way AI operates?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
you were.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just thinking that, you know, I mean, I guess like the rise of fashion, I guess over the last 6 or 7 years, I guess as a kind of like dominant cultural force, like maybe like, I mean, I think like, so obviously it's a particular kind of reading, but my reading of it is that it's kind of has become the dominant force, or one of the dominant forces, and sort of taken over contemporary art as this kind of key reference point, I guess. But I was kind of wondering, you know, like with the potential sort of rise of AI and what that potentially offers, I was just kind of wondering, does that kind of create a threat to that point of sort of domination, I guess, you know, like cultural domination, or is it a matter of like people working in the fashion and adjacent sort of fields to use it in particular ways and sort of navigate it in particular ways? I mean, I guess like I was thinking also sort of like in relation to something like gaming as being a kind of equally sort of dominant, increasingly dominant cultural kind of force or area. It's like that seems like an area where AI has there's a very close connection to it, you know, in terms of its use of AI and blah blah. But like I think maybe in fashion there's a slight tension there in terms of like, where is it going to be made use of, what kind of types of roles is it going to disrupt, what forms of like creative processes will it sort of have some effect on? So I guess it was kind of that, really thinking about that.
So I think in terms of it's funny that, because like in fashion it always looks like an industry that is, you know, on the pulse, but I think the backdrop and the structure of a lot of these houses is very old school. So I believe that any type of change, structural change in fashion will take a long time. There's a lot of aversion to, you know, drastic changes. And I think what AI will sort of bring to the table is like cheaper labor. And I think that will be mostly adapted by, you know, like big corporations rather than luxury fashion, I'd say, because I think they're very keen on like the savoir-faire and the human element. I remember I did a campaign, a cultural campaign for Tod's, which I labeled "Made by Humans" instead of "Made in Italy," because I thought that would become sort of the indicator of luxury if like a human hand had created that. So I don't see it as an immediate threat to luxury fashion. I think if anything, it will be complementary, you know, like for pattern making for textiles. But I doubt that, you know, people will want to exchange creative directors for an AI just because they don't want that.
So. Right. Yeah. I was wondering also about, I guess, like the that, I mean, do you see a potential, I guess, like danger or risk of that I guess sort of increasing that sort of binary between sort of like humans and like machines, or humans and I guess like in this case like AI systems? Do you see I mean, I can kind of see that being a potential sort of like trap in a certain way. I mean, if it kind of gets played out in particular kind of ways.
Yeah, that's a really political question, because I've been thinking about that. I feel like that's something that's being put in our minds by the public discourse, the binary element of like, this is the machine and this is you. And then, you know, we have Kurzweil talking about the approach of like singularity, where we blend with the AI in like about 10 years. No, but what I'm trying to say is I think that's like an angst mechanism, and that just is not going to be the reality that we're going to experience. We're the human race, have created this form of technology, but we're still like connecting to each other far more than to this thing. So all the outrage about ChatGPT and if it has consciousness or not, I find like that not to be the question. It really is about like, how are we looking to make use of this technology, and should we be more afraid about like the abuse of this technology, and what would actually abuse mean? But I think this idea of like us versus the machine doesn't actually exist. It's something that is being perpetuated in the current discourse.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I wonder why.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I hope you do. That's no pressure, but it is pressure.
I have a question.
Okay.
If I could go first. Hi.
Hey.
Okay. So my question for Katharina was sort of like when you're talking about the trilogy and the paradigm and your process for that, I was kind of wondering, like, how did you decide what goes on, like, content-wise? Like, you had a theme.
Oh, I think you're breaking up.
Sort of like we also saw the final output. So I just wanted to like ask, like, how did you get from like themes to like the final output? Like, how did you know what topics you wanted to write about? How did like the titles come to mind and the concepts come to mind?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, it started with, it morphed. Like I started with the idea of having, I was like, how can I like have one article, one text tell, I basically wanted one text that people had to read in order to know the most important thing. So it was about boiling something down. So I started off by this idea of like just publishing the text by Clement Greenberg, which was called Avant-Garde and Kitsch, and the rest being editorials. I quickly then understood that I have to contextualize it a little bit to what was happening today. And so the theories started coming together from things I had said in boardrooms. Like they're basically things I would say to, CEOs in a presentation. I would say, like this thing about collaborations are over was part of a presentation I had made to Todds in order to get them to stop that. And so I was using my work to, sort of see what were the important key signifiers of the fashion landscape. And then it was like phone calls with friends where we would, there's one theory that's talking about Ferrari doing a fashion collection. I remember my friend called me and we were both like almost crying on the phone and we're like, we're so upset. This is so sad. Such a sad day. So I had this like pretty tight idea in the beginning and then I diluted it while I was making it. And the theories came through life. And then the image part of the issue was just about, I didn't want to make images that made no sense because a lot of magazines, they're just like, who's the coolest photographer and some model and what's the concept? I was really like, I want to give a visual to the thoughts. So it is really easy to make something when you actually have a goal and like a message. Then it kind of all just happens. If you don't have a goal and no message, it becomes pretty difficult. So to your question, like I had this idea of what I wanted to say, and then everything happened to say it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question. Wait. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. That is really amazing. And
Thank you.
I'm really interested in the concept of you only gonna publish like 3 issues for the publication. And I'm wondering, will you continue doing another issue if you find there's like more thing you want to discuss, like of the industry? Because especially like I'm really interested like in how you say like most of the magazine right now, they don't know why they're doing the next issue. And like, especially like when they are brainstorming for the next issue, that is the like most difficult part because they actually don't know what to say. And the only purpose of them doing the issue is their responsibility to continue doing that. So yeah, I was wondering like, are you still gonna continue doing it
one if you have something to say in the future.
Thank you. No, I never say never, but I think my answer is going to be a bit underwhelming. Me starting Paradigm was super counterintuitive because I had all this commercial work, and people usually do editorial in order to get commercial work. So I was doing like the counter wave, which is like, why am I going into editorial if I have so much work? And then I like used my money from my work in order to fund the editorial. So I think that's a period in time. And I think there's going to be like, you know, a moment when I'm not that interested in doing that anymore. And so I set myself, you know, like I'm doing these 3, and then I'm gonna, you know, let this industry do what it wants to do on its own. And go back into more commercial work or not. So I think I'm pretty good with the 3. You know, I after this one, I was like, I'll never do this again. So, because it takes a lot of time. So
Yeah.
yeah, but like, you know, I think, again, I said it's a medium. I think the medium doesn't really matter. It's really about what you're saying. So, you know, I could say the same thing in a commercial project, ideally.
It's that sort of like slightly awkward silence bit where, how long do you
No one
like?
has a question right now. I have a question. I would really love to know what you guys are looking, you know, if you have an idea of what you want to do in fashion or what you want to do after you finished your studies. That's something I'm super interested to hear.
Yeah. So you guys.
Hi, my name is Daria, and I would like to thank you for your talk. It was super exciting for me to hear because actually, like, I would not say that I'm planning to become a creative director, but that's something that really interests me. And when you first was like introducing yourself and talking about your work in general, like it was so interesting for me to hear. And like, to be honest, I was trying to come up with some really interesting questions, but I'm like super tired by the end of this day. I'm super, yeah, as I already said, I'm super interested in all the processes, how everything is organized inside this, like, as you said, you're connecting the business world and fashion world. And yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So are you like planning to work at a creative agency, or do you have you thought about it?
So I think I'm at this stage when I'm trying different things and running like different projects, where like throughout the time I find myself in this position of like connecting people or processes or something. So like it just naturally feels like I'm something like a this position person or something like this. So yeah.
I was going to ask actually, like, sorry, I was going to ask, like, off the back of that, I mean, to the group, I guess, like, you know, this relationship with like business is quite. I was thinking when your presentation, I was thinking there was a really interesting aspect of sort of like yeah, like explicitly talking about the kind of business aspect of the work. And you know, like I mean, when I graduated, that sense of sort of business was very sort of like a dirty word in a way. And, you know, like there was this sense of like, you know, you do this creative work and then someone else deals with the business bit and you do, you know, like there was a kind of sense of purity in just doing this kind of creative work. But I was wondering with like the group, like, how do you feel about that kind of business aspect of I guess like creative practice? Like, is it something that you are wanting to intervene in, or is it like, again, like for me, when I was whatever 20 extra or whatever, it seemed like a dirty term in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess like, yeah, like is sort of intervening in kind of business something that you find of kind of creative interest, I guess? That's to everyone, by the way.
If no one's replying, so I think like it should be interesting for everyone, because like business is like, I don't know, we all need to earn money, and we all need to like how is that, like okay, so yeah, just sorry, yeah. I'm done for today. But I mean, like, it's just a thing that is so like related to our life, and when we can not only think about the creative processes and forget about the things that like allow us to do whatever we want and stuff. Yeah, if this makes sense.
I also want to share something on that note, which is, let's take a designer, which is the most creative person that obviously often lives in a vacuum and is very shielded by companies and like labeled as like the artist of the house. And I have seen people like butt heads with the business side, with the CEOs, and being like, I want to produce this bag, I want to do this. And what my takeaway from that was that restrictions, or let's say constraints, are very useful for creative process. And the moment you sort of play with the constraint and work within it, you can, I think it actually works as a fuel. If you leave a design and just say do whatever, they most probably are going to come back with something terrible. Like that, it had happened. But if they sort of take on or embrace what they have to work within the frame, it gets really good. And I think that's, for example, something that Daniel Lee is really good at. Like he just, he's like, this is what that is. Let's just respect that. It's not about me and just about me. It's like, I'll take this pattern, I'll do this, no matter if we like it now or not. But there's an element of respect to the heritage. So to say that the business side can inform the creativity and can really make it better. It's a dialogue. Because at the end of the day, you want people to buy your clothes. You want to not be masturbating, you want to be contributing. So it's about looking at the rational side while you're being creative.
And is that something like, when did you become sort of aware of that as part of your practice? Like in terms of like thinking about how you could intervene or sort of work with like the strategy of an organization, and seeing that as a creative part of your practice as well. And
well, no, I've been very privileged, because I had this access to like the Todd's highest spheres, even above the managers, through the family, which had brought me in. So I was sitting at the table with the people that are making the actual decisions. And I understood that as an image can change a brand, but only so much. It's really always about the internal structure. And you will have most impact on a brand image if you create a good foundation within the company. So I just saw the power of that far outdoing the potential of like one digital ad. Like the Prada ad can only work because of the impeccable structure of the creative team within the house. And the rise of Balenciaga, which almost like they could do any project they wanted. Like they could create bad images, but we would still read them within their amazing identity that they have created. They gained this like freedom by establishing this very strong, solid foundation on like. So I think it's just where the power sits. And how I got there sort of, it's really about figuring out how you can get what you want, like, or what you want to do. which is almost like it's really like a people skill. Like I to that point, you know, it's not just the designers. I work with so many constraints. I work with so many constraints that, like, you know, projects are not going the way that I want them to go. And then you have to live with that sort of frustration that it's not what you wanted. But then you have to just see the bigger picture, and that's a real skill set. Because a lot of, you know, male creative directors especially, you know, they're like hardcore hardliners. And I feel like I've achieved a lot by being sort of a little bit more mutable and going with the flow and trying to bring change by degree. So yeah, frustration is part of creativity.
Does anyone else have any either questions or response to the original question around sort of like what you want to, I guess, like the kinds of work or ways of working, I guess, that you would like to do once you've kind of graduated, I guess, or even now maybe?
Yeah, I actually really agree with what Katharina just talked about, because for us as students now, I feel like we are learning a lot of like knowledge, and especially like after we graduate, when we're going to like work in the business and stuff, it's time for us to really like give back our knowledge to to contribute to the society, and that's kind of really meaningful at the same time. And I feel like for us as designers, having pressures and also boundaries, and it can be quite good and positive, as it can like really push ourselves to be more creative at the same time, and maybe to see other like different aspects that we as a students we don't normally have, or we didn't like expect to see. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think big part of that's the problem in it, is because everyone here wants to at least, you know, make a living and be viable in this world. And that's the problem we're facing, is, you know, that maybe the future will be currently unpopular. The future you want to see is in this very moment an unpopular choice. So, you know, it's about like, how much can you be in integrity with yourself and your beliefs and still make a living in this system? And that's why Paradigm was important to me, because I was able to make a living. I was deeply upset with it though. And so it was about like, you know, how can I bring a sense of like what I actually want to say? And I had created that freedom for myself. And I think there's other ways, you know, and to a degree, there's other ways to do that, more fearless ways, where, you know, you can say, I don't want to become a marketing director at Balenciaga. I'm going to say no to that, and I'm going to found a new company, which doesn't have to be a brand, but I'm going to found a new business, and I'm going to do it my way, which, you know, I think we need way more of. We need new institutions. The answers are not lying with the brands we're seeing right now. We need new answers. And I want you guys to bring them, you know.
I mean, I guess like with that in mind, do you see I mean, to say like AI as this whatever slightly sort of a placeholder term, but I guess like, do you see the sort of recent sort of technological developments as a means by how some of those things can happen, or are you very sort of still, or more pessimistic to that, I guess?
I think I'm on the pessimistic side, just because for me, technology, like any revolution that announces itself as a revolution, is going to be hijacked by people in power in the current system. So I think they're going to be, technology will be utilized to keep the status quo in place, because people in power are benefiting of the status quo. So the answer will be yes and no, but I think more no. I think I have this. I just had a chat actually with someone that runs a competitor to ChatGPT. Forgot the name. It's with an A. Jack might know, but he's like the CEO of the company, and he said, I think there's a big problem with the public being such part of a scientific revolution, because it will ultimately change its outcome. If we would have all been part of, the creation of the car or something, it would have maybe had a different outcome, because you must understand that AI will be a lot about like government regulations, just as like crypto is, and government will be influenced by the participation of the public in the creation of this technology. So they will be biased because they want votes, and they will be, so I think this like public, like even that Google publicized like ChatGPT, the guy said to me from the company, he said, I thought it was a bad thing, because everyone else that's working on a chat is now biased and influenced by what they had done. And it's sort of taking away the possibilities. So that's something I'm thinking about a lot, how like this sort of publicizing of innovation. And then, on the other hand, you have Apple, which is like silent as a mouse, like working on, glass that has holographic capabilities, and we have never heard of it. And I think that's the way things should go. So I have not so much faith in like AI as a revolution in the fashion industry. I have a lot of faith in analog in the fashion industry.
Jack, who's just put his camera on, has just chatted, put something in the chat saying, is it Any World?
Oh yeah, the competitor to ChatGPT, there's one called Anyword.
No, I'm trying to find this guy. I was invited to this dinner. They were all so brilliant and smart, and I could not even remember the name of that company. I'm trying to find it. It's a guy that went to Yale. I don't know anything else. I'll ask that woman who invited me, but I'll tell you. He's smart, very Mark Zuckerberg, like zoned out-ish.
Cool. That's a great description. Very Mark Zuckerberg. It's a vibe, right? Irene, do you have a question? I only ask because I know that you put your camera on, so that's my
you got me.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for your talk. It's very motivating, and I really love the part you mentioned about your boss asked you what can you bring to the company, and you said I can bring clients, and I really love that sentence. And I also really want to know, curious about what happened after that, like how the process of convincing people working with you or working with your company.
Thank you. I wanted to share that because I wanted to show you guys that like I had nothing to offer but like my enthusiasm and my conviction that I could do this. And so it's doable. You can win people with pure enthusiasm and being up for the job. So to your question, it went really bad. Like it went terrible. Like the first half year, there was a lot of screaming and like a lot of, Kat, you're terrible. I was learning, these programs on my own. I'm sure you guys had to learn that in school or something. And I had no clue. So I just sucked at it. And I would just stay until 4 a.m. every day trying to learn and like crying at my desk and, being afraid when he would show up and just tell me again how I sucked. And then there was just this moment when I was like, it's almost like I was really bad at maths at school. And then when I got over the fact that I was bad at it and just acknowledged that I would just move from where I am, I got good. And so I was like, okay, I'm bad at this, but like, I'll just say I'm bad at it. I'll be fine with it. And I'm just going to do the best as I can. And that's when I started to just be like, okay, I'm not the best at Photoshop mockups for Bogner ski slopes, but I'm gonna just hone in on the way I have with words and the presentations I can build. And so it's just about figuring out what you can actually bring to the table. And, you know, it's not always about delivering what you said you would deliver. It's not about, you know, he wouldn't judge me on like, are you bringing clients? It's really just about showing the effort and bringing something to the table. And so about the clients, you know, I really managed to get him to some, you know, I would cold outreach to like CEOs, writing them. And it's funny that because I feel like no one's doing that. So a lot of people actually are getting back. I remember I got an interview. I never did interviews in my life, but like that was my one interview with the Rowe president, Daniel Schulte. And I just wrote him an email saying, I know you're not HR, but I'd like to work for the Rowe. And he literally invited me for an interview. So don't shy back. And also I have 1,000 unreplied messages. Like I have been so unhireable by anyone. Like I think I've never received an interview through like, you know, applying for a job actually, besides that. So I think some don't get discouraged, and sometimes then it's just not your path. That's really important. There's another way. Yeah.
Can I ask, this is a kind of question for Jack in a way, because I don't know, just because he's here, and I was just curious, I guess about the images that you produced for the issue. I guess like one of the reasons why I'm going to ask this question is that like a lot of because we're working on a project at the moment that's looking at kind of the use of AI or our relationships with AI, and some of the discussions that we've been having over the last couple of weeks, there's a couple of themes that have come out. So like one of them is around this kind of idea of hallucination and like AI and hallucination. It's a question of kind of subconscious and unconscious, and kind of dream like I guess like metaphors or whatever, and alongside that, I'm in the process at the moment of interviewing students for next year, so I'm kind of like madly kind of interviewing like 50 students, whatever, and there's been a kind of recurring theme of like surrealism or surrealist-esque themes that have been kind of quite consistent. So I guess like I was curious about the images that you were producing or helping kind of facilitate. Is like, yeah, like can you sort of talk a little bit about that? And I guess also sort of like, what's your after producing them, sort of like, has it changed how you feel about working with these models in the way that you did?
Yeah, totally. I would love to speak to all those things. I kind of talk about surrealism, the connection to Elsa Schiaparelli and the process okay, let me back up. The brief for this editorial was where the machine is going to take over. And we were thinking about what, you know, who's the artist that could do this, that could like let a machine like take over this like fashion editorial process, which is kind of like a provocative idea. An artist I've worked with for a couple of years, that's kind of like my just like my favorite artist, like mentor. I'm like so lucky to like be able to like collaborate and like help her produce artwork, Loretta Fahrenholtz. She's just like a very provocative artist and is always using film and photography and kind of like a post photography, post cinematic way to kind of like push through this alienation effect in platforms. And by that I mean like finding people on the other side of the algorithm, like this kind of like outsider artists and people that are just doing things at the very kind of like low tier of like the, you know, like the lowest tier of like the kind of like creative industry, and like collaborating with these people to kind of like bring their ideas like into her fine art. So you can go and like look up her work. It's like really, really incredible. So for this, we wanted to think about the machine as this we're using the latest technology to play out a process that's actually very, very old. And this is just an intense layer of granularity that we're able to achieve through massive processing power. But it really is the same game, this combination game that was started with surrealism, with like automatic and drawing and automatic writing, where you would kind of go into this like meditative trance state and just like channel just like channel energy or spirits of the world around you and kind of like automatically draw and write things. And this is kind of like the birth of surrealism, and Schiaparelli kind of, in collaboration with surrealist artists, brought that into fashion. So kind of like out of the surrealist world into like reality through like, garments that people would actually wear and like move around the world. So with the editorial, we kind of like, playfully tried to like bring those ideas back, using AI and trying to like push back against this kind of like really alienating way that AI images are talked about. They're kind of like these kinds of like horrific, kind of like pornographic images that are dangerous and kind of like have this real kind of like raw capitalist feeling to them, and try to like find something that is more soft and emotive and like calling back the spirit of Elsa Schiaparelli herself as a figure and image that we can kind of pull out of these massive archives and of data in the kind of like text image generation, as well as using the Schiaparelli archive itself. AI is a way to kind of like look back through that archive and like kind of bring out those ideas in a futuristic or kind of like post-futuristic way. So I hope that answers the question.
Can I say something to that? Can I say something to that right away? For me, it's also what I said earlier with post-core. It's the same thing. I think we're looking at with surrealism, which was, about automatic writing, bringing up the subconscious and working with the subconscious. I think it's an effort or an intrigue to work with something else than the intelligence of the mind. And I think that's what's happening, right? That's that interest right now, which is like, what other types of intelligence do we have that could possibly answer some of the questions at hand, because the mind answers haven't so far successfully worked.
Yeah.
So I think that's where this like return of surrealism, aside from it being sort of like the groundwork for AI, comes from. That desire to look for alternative intelligence and expand our minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I realized that we're coming to 7 o'clock. So I guess like, does anyone have like a final question or comment? If not, then I would say thanks very much, Kat. It was like really, really incredible. So many sort of insights there. I hope that everyone kind of got so much from it, and also thanks Jack for your sort of cameo appearance.
I love it.
Yeah.
Great to see you, Daniel. Kat, incredible talk. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, so,
Thank you,
and thanks everyone for their questions. And yeah, thanks again, Kat. It was super great. So yeah, exactly.
Give me some claps.
Yeah, exactly. Where are
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to see what you're gonna do.
Yeah, we'll make the kind of work public in some form. So we'll keep you updated.
Cool. Okay. Have a lovely evening over there.
Thanks very much, Kat. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
And Jack, have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.